All right, we're going episode 13. Here we go after 2 weeks.
Been a little
So
bit of a break, but welcome back,
a
everyone.
little bit, yeah. It's kind of tough to figure out what to talk about, but I'm just kind of dealing. But we're just kind of picking whatever in the past past couple of weeks. We were both
Yeah.
sick last week, so we didn't end up doing a show. And the week before that, I don't know what you were busy, and then I just kind of was like tired or something.
The week before was right before spring break, so I had like a bunch of exams and stuff I had to get
Yeah,
done, and it was just like, yeah, I unfortunately just don't have time for this.
yeah, sure. But anyway, so we do have a theology episode this week, so we're gonna try to make this one not super long. So we had to cut down the topics that we could have discussed. But the
Mhm.
first thing is I do want to discuss this once. I feel like this discussion comes back onto the internet every couple months or so, and it's Matt Walsh's big brain take on video games and just in general. So in this particular instance, he's mocking this streamer for learning, becoming really good at Guitar Hero, and he is basically dissing the entire hobby in general, preferring an actual guitar over it. Which is it's the most Matt Walsh take of all time. Let's be honest. And like
Yeah.
it's like every few months he finds somebody who has a cool hobby, and then he's just like, "Oh, this is not one of my pre-approved list of like 5 hobbies that people can do." Um, and I think this is actually kind of a problem too. I think that this alienates especially a lot of younger men from
Mhm.
conservatism, even though and young men are trending towards conservative in general. But the reason they're going to people like Andrew Tate, who have more of a pseudo conservatism um, or radical conservatism, over people like Matt Walsh that might be a little bit more tame, more reasonable for people to go to, is because of the fact that he alienates them with stuff like this.
Right. Like the thing is, when you tell people, no, you're wrong and you're stupid, they're not going to change what they're doing. They're just going to go to a different side. So if we're
Mhm.
examining this through the lens of politics specifically, what Matt Walsh is doing is pretty much the stupidest thing he could do.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like Matt Walsh, like he's not even that old. He looks a lot older than I think he is. I think he's in his late 30s or mid 30s or something like that. So like that's not super old, but like the fact that he's
Right.
basically condemning like a lot of different hobbies pertaining to electronics is I think really telling. I mean, like it's one thing to like raise your kids without electronics, which I mean he does. 'Cause I think that at least in our current society, kids are getting electronics way too early, or parents are being way too loose
Mm-hmm.
with that type
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. So that's one thing, but I think that there comes to an extent where you might be going a little bit too far. You're going to cause alienation, further separation from the culture, which I don't think is good. The for like obviously you don't have to follow along with the way the culture is going, but if you just run away from it entirely, then you lose your voice. You lose the capability to fight back or fight for something.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think it's also worth pointing out that what this guy is doing here is really, really impressive. Like, I could not play the song he's playing here at normal speed, much less 200% speed. This is
For sure.
absolutely insane. And I
I
think the
have
same is generally true of anyone who's like speed running video games. Like, for a while, I was really into like speed running the original Super Mario Bros. Obviously, I didn't do it myself, but I knew a lot about the people who did, and like the things those people can do is just absolutely
Mhm.
insane.
It's really fun to watch speedruns too. It's a very
Yeah,
popular thing to watch on streaming platforms such as Twitch or YouTube.
right. Uh, like
I
it's gone to the point where it's not even like a hobby. This guy's earning money doing this right now.
right. Yeah, yeah, that's another thing. Like, this is his basically his full-time job is to do this, and
Right.
like
Exactly.
because of like he is contributing to society to do this. He's an entertainer. He does things for entertainment based off of his
Yep.
skills, just like how any professional athlete who plays football, basketball, whatever, is really good at what they do, and their talents are utilized for the sake of entertainment. That's how they monetize it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I did it!
But like, I mean, he was like, obviously, it can become an addiction, right? Like, there's people who's
Yeah, for
essentially
sure.
live basically a constant cycle of video game addiction or other forms of addiction, and that's not a bad thing. Or that is a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to just dabble in a little bit of video games to relax or something like that. Um, it can also you can make connections with it. Obviously, like internet,
Mhm.
like friendships, for the most part, are not going to equate to in-person friendships, but they do help quite a bit. They can be nice to build some
Sure.
sort of a community on the internet that you always have access to, even if it doesn't isn't as fulfilling as those in-person friendships. But
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And
Hmm.
like, if he's doing this as his job, how is that different from someone who like sits in front of a computer screen at an office all day as the job? Because I do see the argument that like, oh, he's not outside. This is bad for his
Right.
eyes because he does it so much or whatever. I mean, okay, sure, but
Sure.
99% of job, not 99%, that would be inaccurate to say. Many jobs these days that people do consist of sitting in front of a screen for a long time. And is that healthy for anyone?
Hmm.
No.
Right.
But
And again, like, it kind of just comes down to like, you can't really tell him what to do if he's doing something for a living and enjoys doing it. Like, there's not much you can really stop. Like, obviously, like, you can have a moral issue with what he's doing, but
yeah,
like in reality, like, it's his choice if he wants to ruin his health doing this. And I mean, like, he doesn't look like he's particularly unhealthy with that. A lot of streamers actually are quite fit because they have so much time on their hands compared to the average
right.
individual.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this isn't particularly good for his hand, but
Maybe not. I mean, I saw Rubik's cubes competitively. My hands can get sore from that. I don't know.
mhm,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great conversation. Of course, Matt will also make fun of people who are just geeks in a lot of ways. Like, oh, you're a fan of superheroes. You're a fan of Legos, whatever you want to call it. And I think that, like, there's a certain like hobbies are not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, I think it's good for guys to have hobbies.
right,
I like, for
absolutely.
example, like, my dad is a massive Star Wars fan, and that is one of the ways I'm able to connect with him over Star Wars and things like Lord of the Rings. He has those hobbies that he's kind of geeky, nerdy about, and I'm able to connect with him like that. I think that's generally a good thing. Of course, like, obviously, can it go too far? Absolutely, but I think in the vast majority of situations, it probably won't be.
Mhm,
And of
I
course, like, any
agree. Yeah.
self-respecting guy will be able to, like, walk away if they absolutely need to for something.
Right, absolutely. Like, you know that I used to play this game Star Wars Armada a lot, right? I was really big into Star Wars. I This thing here behind me is full of Star Wars Armada components. This is all Star Wars Armada. Right now, I am taking a huge step back from Star Wars Armada because I just don't feel as passionate about it partially, and I just don't have the time for it either.
Mhm,
Like, I expect I'll come back to it someday. I'd like to teach my kids, if I have kids, how to play it because it's just a fun game.
mhm,
But it's not like dominating my life. It doesn't define who I am. And
right,
because of that, I'm able to have fun with it when I'm enjoying it and when I have time for it. And when that's not the case, like right now, I'm comfortable taking a step back from it.
right, and that's
And I
kinda like
think a
for me
lot of
with
streamers are the same way.
the Rubik's cubes, like, I do it significantly less now. Like, there was a time I was practicing hours a day. Now though, because I'm working so much and have just other things to get done, for the most part, what I do is I maybe practice for an hour, 1 to 2 hours, maybe a week,
Yeah.
and then I'll compete in competitions. I'm going to less competitions though, just because I don't really have the time. And yeah, my improvement rate has gotten slower. Whether that's actually a cause of practicing less or the fact that I am reaching close to my potential, unless I go crazy with practicing and actually grinding, but um, and I don't really want to. And it's kind of like a scary thing because, like, I have a Rubik's cube collection of over $2,000 or something like that. So like,
Yeah.
like to a certain extent, it's like, did I really waste all this money for a small portion of my life? I don't really know, but I do expect to be doing it at least a little bit. Like even if it gets to like where I'm only doing like 1 to 2 competitions a year, I think that. I mean that's likely, but I want to try to keep it a part of my life as much as for as long as possible. But the
Yeah, that makes sense.
time being. But like at the same time, like yeah, I could teach my future kids how to solve it, and then maybe that gets me completely back plugged into the community now as a parent in the community. Though that
Yeah.
be many years down the line, but you never really know. I,
Yeah, and we're both a long way from being a parent.
right. It's just very very true. Maybe not true.
I'm
You never know.
only smiling on the outside right now.
Yeah, the pain, the pain. Anyways, let's move on here. We're at 10 minutes already. So
Yeah.
the next thing we want to talk about is we want to talk about our opinions on the first 4 episodes of Daredevil Born Again. Both of us really, really love the Daredevil show.
Yeah.
Um, I would say I would call it my favorite show. I might have to think a little bit about that. For now, I'm just going to call it my favorite show. Favorite superhero show for sure.
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
I love the darker themes of it, and I love the interactions between Daredevil and Punisher and their sort of moral dilemma that they face. My favorite scene in all of
Yep.
Daredevil is the rooftop scene where those two essentially debate the death penalty, which I think is quite interesting to have, I
Yeah,
guess,
for
more of
sure.
a philosophical discussion in a superhero show of all things.
Right. And I feel like Daredevil at its best, kind of, if you take everything that people generally say is bad about like superhero movies and superhero
Mhm.
shows, like the over the top action, kind of the formulaic structure of them, maybe kind of the shallow emotional level to them, and then get rid of all of that, you have Daredevil. It's just
Right.
excellent on pretty much every level, in my opinion.
Mhm. So the only part of the show I'm not a huge fan of is I'm not a huge fan of the Elektra arc in season 2. It kind of feels like it draws away
Yeah.
from the actual interesting stuff, but like it's
Mhm.
still good.
Yeah, like the second half of season 2 is definitely the worst part of the show, I think.
Mhm.
But season 1 and 3 and the first 5
Right.
episodes of season 2 are perfect.
Yeah, definitely. But anyways, we need to talk about Born Again. We're not talking
Yes,
about the first 3
yes.
seasons. So, we're 4 episodes in thus far. Um, what do you think? What do you think?
I I would say I'm surprised how well Disney has done with this, especially with kind of what we heard about like what it was going to be. So far it's kind of maintained like the grittiness of the first 3. I feel like the show has been pretty faithful to Daredevil as a character. Like there's nothing in it that makes it's like offensive to the character like She-Hulk kind of was. It's an enjoyable show to watch, first of all.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm certainly enjoying it. It's keeping me engaged. And I will
Mhm.
say I do think that episode 4 was probably my well, it's hard it has my favorite scene in Born Again thus far, but it might be
Sure.
my least favorite episode thus far, which is I don't know how that really balances out, but it felt like there was a lot of stuff happening in this episode. Plays more of
Mhm.
a filler role, but it's still absolutely good, and I think that I don't know. I'm very curious to see where it goes. I do think that it's weaker than the Netflix show as of right now, but it's a little bit too early to
Yeah.
actually say so for absolute certainty. And again, I am surprised. Well, I wouldn't say I'm kind of surprised Disney's able to pull something like this off. Although we do know that there was some rewritings done with the
Mhm.
show, so they likely threw some stuff into or took some stuff out in order to try to avoid the stuff the like the progressive ideology that has absolutely killed them
Yeah.
financially with shows in the past such as The Acolyte, which in some ways it's still like I saw something saying that like the watch time for the show is really low for Disney Marvel standards on Disney Plus, and I think that
Mhm.
that could just go to show that possibly the Acolyte has been leaves a constant stain on the brand for a
Yeah, that
while
could
now.
be. The other
Because like,
thing I would say is maybe this show will have full prey, not full prey. Maybe it'll benefit from kind of the Andor effect, where at
mhm,
first it's like not really a big deal because it's like a little bit more of a lesser known character, maybe a little more sophisticated than your average like easy to watch content on Disney Plus. But as it goes and as more and more people start to watch it, maybe it'll begin to do better. And like I think
mhm,
Andor is still a pretty popular thing to watch on Disney Plus, like
right.
two
I'm
or
very
3 years
curious.
later even.
Yeah, very curious about season 2, how well that's gonna do.
Yeah. But you mentioned
'Cause
kind of the progressive ideologies that have been
mhm.
hurting Disney financially, and this show is not completely free from
It's
that
not completely
either.
free. Um, Thankfully, I wouldn't say from what they've it's not like it's not been in your face, which is
Yeah.
nice. Not like, gosh, what's the best example of like in your face?
She-Hulk.
She-Hulk, yeah, She-Hulk. She-Hulk's not canon. The Daredevil scenes in She-Hulk are not canon. In my mind,
Yeah.
that show never happened. Actually, not real at all. Definitely help me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that would be just super on the nose. It's been a lot less hidden, and I mean, like the thing is that I mean, since all these characters are returning, they can't really race swap any established characters, so at least you don't have that to deal with.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Like
there's been some stuff in it for sure.
compared to like the usual hit you over the head kind of messaging that Disney tends to have, this show is not that bad. Like Fisk is very, very obviously being used as like a Trump commentary piece, which I'm not a huge fan of, and I'm not a huge fan of the commentary itself either, but it's not done in like a
Mhm,
offensive way to the
right.
viewer. It doesn't insult your intelligence.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I feel like at least for me, like, I never really thought of him as a Trump allegory until I saw someone
Yeah,
point it out. So, like, I think it's perfectly possible to just completely like evade the real life politics that are placed
sure.
within the show. It's also possible that that wasn't their intent at all, but I do think there's a good chance that it was more in your face before they did the rewrites, possibly to try and tone it down a little bit. But I don't know. And I mean,
Probably.
I'm not a huge fan of Fisk this season, although he hasn't
Mhm.
done too much. I feel like the other seasons you felt like his lingering presence in the background a lot more than you do in this one, and that's possibly just
I agree.
building up. Obviously, Matt hasn't worn really the suit since the first episode, so I think that might be part of the reason for it. But also just feels like, oh,
Yeah.
it's just Kingpin again. He just happens to be mayor this time instead of in the background with his crime. And I mean, like they even like show you that he's not exactly a pure of heart politician now. Like
Yeah.
he is still doing his shady deals. I kind of wish that they would have made that more ambiguous and tried to hide that a little bit longer to maybe
Mhm.
add a little bit more nuance to what's actually going on with Fisk.
I will say when I first learned that Fisk was going to be the villain in the show, I was fairly disappointed because the defeat of Fisk at the end of season 3 was absolutely perfect, and I would have been entirely happy if that had been like the end of Fisk in the MCU. I've kind of been able to forget like my gripe with that throughout the show because Fisk is just a great character. But even in that, I feel like the show doesn't completely understand his character. I think that in the first 3 seasons of Daredevil, there was a lot more nuance to who he was, a lot more exploration of his backstory to make him, to an extent, a sympathetic
Hmm.
villain. Like he was absolutely brutal, obviously, and he's still absolutely
Right.
brutal now. But back then, you felt like you had some context for that brutality that
Right.
made it more understandable. Whereas
Yeah. I
this
also
season, he feels like a lot more of a pure evil villain.
Sure, and I feel like when I really like the artistic aspect of Fisk's character in the Netflix
Hmm.
show, and I mean, there's a little bit of that here and there, but like I feel like just that connection showing his love for art and paintings for whatever reason, which of course helped him connect with Vanessa, and all that. I think that was a lot interesting. But yeah, it does sort of seem like he's like they're trying to paint him as like 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 more of a not so black and white. I feel like with trying to like, oh, he's the mayor, he's good, he's doing it for the people type of thing. But I think they've kind of failed in that sense of trying to make it super ambiguous because they are just revealing that, yeah, he's basically just same old Kingpin. He's just doing it more publicly now.
That could be, yeah.
Right. And of course, like, he's not the only villain. We know Muse is gonna be
Yeah,
in it as well. I think that's how you pronounce that villain's
I think
name. So
so.
like,
I'm really
of
excited
course,
to see Muse.
yeah, I think he could be interesting. I think we'll see. Of course, Fisk is going to be the main villain at the end, and let me guess, Matt's going to stop him or something.
Yeah.
um, I don't know how he gets there will be kind of interesting. We'll see.
Hmm.
Anyways, yeah, this obviously this was already we already showed this, but this is my favorite scene of the show thus far. This interaction between Matt and Frank. Um, just because it does remind me a lot of the rooftop scene where they debate.
Yeah.
This one feels a little bit more intense because it's a lot more personal for them. Obviously, with Foggy and all of that.
Yeah, I think this was probably the best scene in Daredevil Born Again so far. It was absolutely great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean these two guys are just perfect for the roles as well.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that both of them are back,
Hmm.
and at least knowing that John Bernthal did initially refuse to come back in an earlier version of Born Again, I think at least gives me some hope that there will be something good to come out of this season, at least with his character.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's hard to say at the moment. Um, yeah, anything else you want to say?
Um, I mean, I'm sure we could talk about Daredevil
Probably
all night
could.
because
Yeah.
it's a phenomenal show, but yeah, I don't have too much more right now.
Okay. Cool. So we kind of wanted to. This is sort of related, but sort of not. So obviously, like the main moral dilemma between Punisher and Daredevil is their perspective on like the death penalty, essentially. In some ways, those two characters are the personification of the death penalty debate. And of course,
Sure.
their rooftop scene, my favorite scene in the Netflix show, um, basically is that debate played out between two characters. But I do kind of want to discuss this because, at least for me, I'm somewhat conflicted about it, just because I can't find an absolute perspective. I can't decide for certain whether I want it, and perhaps that there is going to inevitably be some nuance to this particular issue.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, I think the issue for me is I generally think that the death penalty is a reasonable penalty in some cases, but the challenge is where does one actually draw the line?
Right.
Um, which I mean, like, I mean, here's the Mormons' take on it. So Shad has his take on the death penalty. He basically gives a few different cases where he thinks that it'd be worth. And I would generally agree for some of these. I absolutely agree with child sexual abuse, um, also trafficking. I generally agree with those. The other ones are a little
I
bit
don't know
less
about drug trafficking, but
yeah, yeah. That's
that
fair.
seems harsh. But
Hmm.
child sexual abuse, rape, and human trafficking are all like, yeah, death penalty.
Yeah, definitely for sure. I mean, terrorism. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd be fine with that as
easily.
well. Murder is kind of
I
a
would,
tricky one, like life for a life. Okay, that I mean that seems fair. It might be like it might be I guess I don't want to say nice, but uh, good for the victims' families and friends in some cases.
mm,
Like I feel like
I,
for me, like what I would probably say is like there could be maybe like a second chance sort of system for some of
sure.
these as well. But like I mean, like like if you've offed multiple people, then I think that like in that case, like you've had your second chance at that point, sort of thing.
Yeah. Murder's a hard one because,
Hmm.
like, it's a complicated issue. Like, what was
Right.
the manner in which the person was murdered?
Right.
Why was the person murdered?
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of different factors going into it. I would say that my first kind of instinct is to have a kind of two different possible punishments for the person convicted of murder, the less harsh being life in prison and the more harsh being death penalty. But that's
Right.
just like my knee-jerk reaction and
Mhm.
probably could be criticized.
Right. And I mean, I feel like generally speaking, I think that we do need to become tougher on crime or tough on crime in general.
Yeah,
Which and it is, again, it is a sort of a tricky issue because, like, well, what about the possibility of rehabilitation, type of things? Is that the right word?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because like it is difficult. Like it does kind of suck to basically take away the rest of people's lives either by putting them in prison or just taking it like
Sure.
instantly. Like there's something to be said about that. And like at least if we're thinking about this like biblically, like is the death penalty biblical? I think that it's also a little bit of a complicated issue because I mean like if you look at it, like Jesus essentially is like offers a second chance through the salvation because of our human condition deserving of hell. Jesus's sacrifice on the cross and resurrection gives us essentially a second chance. So does that mean that we should implement a system like that in our actual society?
I would say not. I think that what we do with people who have proven themselves to be a menace to society in a very blatant and physically harmful way to other individuals, I think that's a different issue than Jesus offering to forgive people by dying on the cross for them.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
don't I don't think
I
the
think,
two are
and that's why I'm a little conflicted about this because I mean it's very clear that under like the old covenant that the death penalty is certainly allowed in many cases, written
right.
within Jewish law. So is it enough to say that in the new covenant, that death penalty just gets immediately revoked? I really don't think so. And again, like it can be really like have a purely biblical perspective on this. It's hard to say, or do we have to consider secular perspective as well?
I guess the
Most
place I would start, if we're looking at it from the Bible, is that in the Old Testament, the death penalty did exist. So, at the very least, that proves that the death penalty is not always wrong. There is
right.
a right use for the death penalty. From
Mhm.
there, you have to go to the argument, well, that was in a government that God specifically commanded be formed. God gave that government those laws. So since we now deal with governments which God did not specifically give the laws of, should we have the death
Right.
penalty? My argument would be yes, we still should.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable understanding of it. And I mean, like the whole like the greater good argument, which of course is abused in a lot of cases, but I think that it is a good argument that for the absolute worst of the worst people that are a complete threat to a large community, or a large amount of individuals, to completely prevent them from fulfilling that threat, I think would just lead to just a generally better society.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so because like I feel like it's like it's so tricky to figure out what that line actually is. Because like obviously like obviously like part of the reason why it is such a controversial idea is because the fact that historically it has been abused in cases, and innocent people have been um, uh, sentenced to the death penalty, which is
Right.
unfortunate. So, of course, you have to also factor in that. How do you ensure that the justice will be correct? And I mean, like, that's also kind of something that is mentioned within the Daredevil Punisher, is that Punisher is often criticizes the system that Matt tries so hard to uphold and wants so badly to be effective, while Punisher seems to have a generally pessimistic attitude towards the system for one reason or another. Of course, I think Punisher might go to a new extreme. He oftentimes dehumanizes the people that he goes after, but
Yeah.
and I'm strongly against dehumanization of in any situation.
Of course, it's a little bit different too when we're talking about like what should a vigilante do than what should
Right.
the government have the authority. But I still think there is still kind
Right.
of the symbolic element there of Daredevil and Punisher representing the two opposite extremes, kind of.
Right. I mean, the interesting thing is that like both of them do effectively break the law in order to bring their idea of justice.
Right.
Which of course, like I mean, like obviously, like I wouldn't recommend anyone to become a vigilante in real life. It probably wouldn't end very well for you or for the community.
Yeah,
So
definitely not.
let's not be doing that. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody actually tries. Am I frozen?
No, you're good. I can still see you moving.
Okay,
Am I
interesting. My
frozen?
screen. Okay, sorry, my screen froze for a second. Okay.
Oh, gotcha.
Don't know if that'll show up in the recording or not. I don't know. I lost my thought now. Dang it.
I guess I feel like the death penalty is not that complicated when it comes to should it exist or not.
Right.
I firmly believe that the death penalty should exist, and I don't think that should be a controversial thing to say. I think that logic shows that the death penalty should exist. Now, when you go to the specific circumstances, that's where it gets a little more complicated. And like, as you mentioned, the death penalty has been administered wrongly in the past, which is obviously a horrible tragedy. So what steps can we take to prevent that from happening? Like, and is it worth the risk? I guess some people would ask. Yeah, it gets difficult when you get into the weeds of specific crimes that may or may not deserve the death penalty. I guess the one thing I will say in response to this Twitter post specifically is that I don't think that torture and castration should be punishments the government is inflicting on individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption. The Australian Mormon going a little haywire.
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting conversation to see where it actually ends up leading. And like oh my gosh, I've seen some ridiculous arguments from people. I've heard people try to say that you can't be pro-life and pro-death penalty.
Yeah, I get that
Which I
one
think
all the time.
which is such a dumb argument because there's a big difference between literally the most innocent a human being can be, which is in the womb, versus someone who's convicted of a absolutely horrific atrocity. There's a very big difference there. I don't know why that's an argument.
Yeah, that's like the easiest one to refute too. Like
yeah, it is.
I've done a fair bit of like pro-life arguing online in the past, and someone inevitably throws that one at me, and it's like, well, convicted criminal versus infant. I think there's a difference here.
Right.
And no one's ever had a response to that either. Like, I've never heard anyone be like, "Oh, but what about this really good counter argument?"
It's just like the like Twitter NPC, Reddit NPC argument that like someone heard once and they're just like, "Oh, it's such a good argument. I must say this too."
Exactly.
Which, and that's like 99% of political discourse. I know I'm guilty of doing that crap too. So
sure.
That's where it gets a little bit challenging. But yeah, anyways, I think we discussed that pretty well.
I think so. Yeah.
Let's see. Which one of these do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about woke right, or do you want to talk about the perspective of ethics to Gen Z or whatever?
I feel like ethics is more in line with what we've just been talking about, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, we're
I
gonna
mean,
do
we
it.
could like,
We're gonna do it.
okay,
All right. So I saw this post. What was this? 11th, 2 weeks ago. It's from this guy who is I want to his ethics teacher, philosophy teacher, something like that. And teaching 2025. So he's teaching. This is undergrad. So these are going to be Gen Zers. Um, and there's this contradiction that I've seen a lot. A lot of people have seen a lot when it comes to the idea of subjective morality. Obviously, we discussed that monstrosity of a post from Homath about about morality, but this one's I think a little bit more simple to discuss. And this is an actual
yeah,
logical contradiction that they're having here, where these two things you can't really hold both of these opinions of having basically morality is relative, culturally constructed, and you hold specific convictions and can't tolerate opposing viewpoints because if morality is basically relative, then you really can't have much of a say when people have different morality different than you.
yep,
Yeah, and of course, like it's especially clear to Christians such as us who have a objective moral standard, that being God's word, the Bible, Scripture, to at least lay that foundation. Of course, it's not always super easy to apply it to any infinite possible situation, but generally speaking, it does give at least the backbone of an objective standard. Um,
absolutely.
so obviously for us that's pretty easy to just like to be able to agree with point number two while being able to disagree with point number one, so we aren't actually contradicting ourselves in that extent,
Hmm.
that manner. But it is kind of baffling how common this is. I'm also kind of curious why this happens. I think that
Yeah.
it's possible that, like, obviously logic isn't typically taught as a general. I know I took in at college, I took logic for my like philosophy credit, but I don't know if
Oh,
every
cool.
college has one. Is that a thing? I can't remember. I'm pretty
I
sure. I'm
would
pretty sure it
guess
was.
every university has a logic class and requires
Well, yeah,
students to take a philosophy credit.
right,
Obviously, that does not mean every student in college takes logic.
right. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's kind of it's strange how like so many people would hold this particular view, and I mean, for all we know, it's actually a much smaller group of people that hold to this view. Um,
Sure.
but like it's kind of wild how people won't read, like, because this is like you don't even have to like know like the name of logical fallacies to see like, oh wait a minute, something's going on here. This doesn't make any sense. How is this relative? But I get absolutely upset when somebody disagrees with me and has their own
Yeah.
morally relevant relative opinions. And like this, like to just to continue this comment here, the students can't even articulate why they have these ethical convictions. They can't even articulate their why they believe something. Which I mean might just come from like, oh, morality is just relative and culturally constructed, so I can't really explain why I think this. I just know that I'm right, you're wrong.
Hmm. Well, yeah. I
Um,
mean,
um, and it's kind of interesting, and just to continue with this comment, it said like for the students that could articulate why they held a specific position, they're actually more likely to accept disagreements and would um probably be better off defending their position as well, even if they aren't like
yeah,
converting
exactly.
people to their view.
Like the moral relativism person you hear about who then gets offended when someone disagrees. Like you literally can't defend your position because you're
Mhm.
beginning on the assumption that morality essentially doesn't exist or that it differs
Right.
from person to person. So if someone else disagrees with you, you can't say they're wrong because you've already said from the get-go
Mhm.
that there is no right answer. It just
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Right. And I like this. This is from the same guys, the original post. There's a decline in critical self-reflection as an
Mhm.
epistemic virtue, which I think is just like a lot of people aren't actually thinking why they believe something. They're kind of
Sure.
just accepting, I believe this, therefore it's right, or something like that. And that's kind of due to this idea that they're now becoming more of this collective social media sphere, or even just like
Right.
collective cultural sphere instead of the more individualistic thinking. Which I mean, like, there's pros and cons to both individual and communal types of
Mhm.
thinking, but
Mhm.
um, I just think a lot of people don't actually take time to think why they think or believe something. And like, even if I disagree with you, like, I can respect someone that recognizes why they hold a specific opinion, because
Yeah,
they're at
sure.
least able to articulate their opinion and at least argue for or defend their opinion.
I think you actually have to give a good argument for your opinion to win my respect on it, but yeah, I agree.
Right. And I mean, like, an example of a not good argument is, oh, morality is relative and culturally constructed, and I'm right, you're wrong. That's a really bad
Yes,
argument. You
that's
lose
a really
basically
stupid
instantly if you
argument.
say that. And of course, like, if we're talking like within the context of religion, um, this is obviously the question of morality, I think, gives a lot of like actual like atheist intellectuals a bit of a hard time because they recognize this inconsistency.
Right.
Which is why you'll have people like Math who are trying to articulate an objective moral standard without having some sort of objective backbone to give it that,
Mhm.
and it just kind of like sounds eh, insane. It's very
Yes.
difficult to articulate a position such as that, but they're trying to do it because I think the moral argument is one of the ones that atheists have the biggest time struggle with. Um,
Mhm.
Of course, like, the moral argument isn't necessarily the best argument for God, but it's certainly an argument against, um, whatever.
I don't know if it's a great argument because it's pretty easy for the atheist to just say something along the lines of like, well, we've all kind of
Mhm.
been nurtured to believe that morality exists. It's been
Right.
inculcated in us rather than being
Right, and I guess, like, some
objectively
atheists,
there.
yeah. I feel like they would also kind of appeal to this whole cultural construction thing, like, "Oh, the correct morality is the one that is the most beneficial for society," and that's probably the position
Right.
that a lot of them would hold. So, yeah, I agree, that's not the best argument, but using this argument, like, this is like, if you're using this is like Reddit level argumentation, so it's not
Mm.
gonna hold up in an actual debate against any experienced opponent,
But
even
even to
mildly
fall
experienced.
back to your best for society argument, like that begs the question, what qualifies as good for society and why
Right.
is the this so-called good of society a goal worth working for and making the
Right.
basis of reality?
And of course, you also have to like determine like what about other societies that have chosen their own moral standard? Are they correct in
Mhm.
that assumption? They believe they're doing what's best for society. Is that correct? When you look at radical Islam, is that just as acceptable of a moral system as our current Western culture is?
Right, exactly.
And I mean, this whole debate is kind of is it's very challenging, which is why I'm glad as a believer that I have at least in a moral standard, objective moral
Yeah.
standard to go back
And
to.
honestly, like, I mean, Christians have debates about morality within Christianity, and those
Right.
debates are a million times more interesting than the people talking past each other about
For sure.
subjective versus objective morality.
Right, right. I mean, even like the death penalty, you could probably see that being debated in the church.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Mhm. Yeah, anyways, yeah, so we're at 40 minutes. So I think that's enough topics for this episode.
Yeah, probably so.
But we got to get
I
going
think
on
we had
to
some
our.
interesting stuff in
Oh
there.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, we're going to go into our Facing the Pew episode, which will obviously come out
Yes.
Thursday, but yeah, anyways. So thank you all for tuning in for this one. We'll see you in the next one.
Have a great week.